What is going on? This is SCP-CRNP, also known as Lack of Lepers. Thank you very much for joining us on tonight's cast. We do this every weeknight at 7:30 Central Standard Time, of course in the PM. Come on, don't be crazy. And what we do is we go to the SCP Wiki and we basically read the articles that were posted yesterday in an attempt to keep up. So let's make sure all our levels are going. Things are looking good on this end. Feel free to jump in the comments as we go over these articles. Let's do a quick mic check. Brian?
Test.
Okay. Maybe one more time for me. I think I might turn your mic up just a smidgen.
Testing the mic.
Okay. Let's try one more thing. I'm going to just adjust the levels, Brian, as you talk. So just say a phrase over and over again while I fine-tune that.
Slappy cheese, slappy cheese, slappy cheese, slappy cheese, slappy cheese, slappy cheese, slappy cheese.
Okay, that's good, and great choice of phrasing. All right, so let me share the screen. Let's get down to business, because we got quite a lot of work to do tonight. Let me fix that. Oh, that's better. Okay, and then finally, let's do one nice little touch, and then we will be going. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so thanks for showing up. Let us get right into it. Long episode last night. I certainly hope this goes by a little quicker, because damn, I need some sleep. All right, so the first one on the list. Let's take a peek at the list. This is the new pages feed. New page, and there were only two that were posted yesterday. One is SCP-6802. The other is 6324. The first has 4 comments. The second has 2 comments. So that should be interesting. And we will dive right in, starting with 6802. So on the screen, once again, we'll start to do this as we get a little more familiar with our format here, but we may even try to install a script that removes the rating so that we are not, our unbiasedness is not contaminated immediately. But just on the glance, looks like this is about -7, so we might not expect this to survive. And SCP Wiki has about a 90% success and efficiency rate for deleting articles that deserve it, with about 1 out of 10 being deleted when they don't. So let us read this together and see if they have judged and adjudicated this properly, and if not, maybe we can learn a thing or two. So this is SCP-6802. The object class is Euclid. We are going old school with the formatting here, with no special bells and whistles, which I appreciate. Brian, let's hit it.
Special Containment Procedures. Anomaly SCP-6802 is contained in a modified Class I humanoid/biothreat containment cell, HBCCI, situated in the Organic Anomaly Containment Wing of Site 921. Containment cell features that differ from standard HBCCI blueprints are as follows. No fewer than 5 dolls, all resembling human children between the ages of 5 and 10. A single ball made of rubber. An assortment of pacifiers, exact quantity determined by Site Command 1, hardcover copy of First Time Motherhood by Lawrence T. Malcolm. Direct interaction with SCP-6802 is forbidden outside of circumstances necessitating containment cell entry, maintenance concerns, emergencies, power failures, etc. All interaction is to be conducted via remotely operated UGV-1 equipped with a multi-joint manipulation arm on the upper chassis.
All right, so we've set the stage. There's one final paragraph to the containment procedures. So far, I think we're dealing obviously with something that could go in 2 directions. One of 2. One, either it's sort of like the motherly figure, or we're going to play on the infantile appearance of how things are shaping up to be. I love it when Special Containment Procedures, their last paragraph, their first paragraph or 2 kind of business, kind of just housekeeping, and then the final paragraph really kind of starts to turn on the gas, and gets that ignition going. So let's see this final
audio consistent with human children, such as laughter, sobbing, or pleas for parental figures should be disregarded and treated as normal. Conversely, audio consistent with adult human speech is cause for an immediate response from on-site security staff.
Okay, so, I mean, on the whole, I think I'm fairly intrigued. So let's get into the description here. See what that has to tell us. Nothing terrible so far, I have to say.
Description: Anomaly SCP-6802 is a tall, amorphous entity that assumes a general physiological structure comparable to that of an adult female human, albeit with notable distortion of baseline human features. There are no apparent facial features save for a mouth situated on the bottom half of SCP-6802's head, pink in pigmentation. SCP-6802 is coated in an unidentified substance chemically similar to resin and leaves residual quantities of this substance upon physical contact with any solid matter. See Document 6802 Juliet Romeo 221, Hazardous Waste Cleanup Reports.
So it's a little weird when you throw things in like Romeo and Juliet shout out when you're talking about hazardous waste cleanup. Is that a dirty joke there? You know, I mean, given that Romeo and Juliet are sort of romantically inclined, hormone embattled teens, basically, when it comes to Shakespeare's take. And then I think there was an actual mistake. Let's go back and read this line. SCP-6802 is coated in an unidentified substance chemically similar to resin and leaves residual quantities. Okay, sorry, I thought that was a mistake, but the mistake was all mine. So once again, nothing too terribly out of the ordinary or wrong here. Let's keep going.
While SCP-6802 is capable of comprehensible speech in a variety of languages and exhibits self-awareness, behavioral research suggests it is largely unwilling to interact with Foundation personnel. Rarely, SCP-6802 can be engaged in conversation should a request be satisfied, namely, providing it with a human child, sex irrelevant, between the ages of 3 and 132. This transitions SCP-6802 to an active state.
So it's not actually 132. That's just Brian making a mistake. Brian, that 2 is really a footnote, so let's pay attention next time.
Fuck you, sir.
Okay, well, I don't know if I deserve that. But the footnote says this is an aggregate range, not an exclusive range. Children outside of this range have been accepted by SCP-6802 on rare occasions. So I can start to see why this article is not rated highly, because not only do we have an active state, and it's not to say that active states can't be a good thing. I certainly think that they have the potential to be used creatively. I just don't think that it happens very often. And really by this point, unless you have something like the 2019 Cliché Con, where people were given permission to put down their biases when it comes to the reliability of cliches like this being disappointments, it's probably not going to fly if you do this, okay? If the staff give you permission to upvote it, to think it's okay to provide an exception, something like the Confit Con, then maybe. But already this line is almost enough to torpedo the article. And then, of course, I think we had our 5-5 up here. So that's 2 strikes, and you might not even get a third these days. So I think the anomaly itself is a little creepy. I think it's a strange thing to talk about a mouth situated on the bottom half of the head, which is where ours is, and is certainly baseline human features, which it would seem through the sentence structure you're trying to contrast regular human baseline features with what you are now explaining, and also mouths typically are pink in pigmentation. So little odd, makes me question just the polishing capability of this author, whoever it is. Thank God we don't know who this is right now. So let's keep moving. I think we're not dead yet. We're wounded, but let's keep going.
SCP-6802, while in an active state, will attempt to engage in behaviors consistent with parenthood and nurturing a child, including feeding the subject, bathing the subject, and providing the subject with cognitive stimulation, usually through the toys found in its containment cell. SCP-6802, however, appears to not comprehend whether or not a given action is harmful, and inadvertently injures or terminates the subject in almost all cases, typically through asphyxiation caused by obstruction of airways by resin.
Well, that's terrifying. Wow. I think also we're flirting with the strike. I think that's a foul, not a strike. But when you have that sort of like lumbering, lovable, but lethally clumsy oaf trope, we kind of are going with that just a little bit. I think it escapes that just barely. So once again, though, nothing terribly wrong in this, in my opinion. The active state and this 5.5, those are things that I really don't regard as sacrilegious in the way that most of the voting class does. So let's finish up the description.
When a subject exposed to SCP-6802 expires in this manner, SCP-6802 will engage in lethargic and aberrant behavior presumed to be consistent with a depressed psychological state, often retreating to a corner of its cell and remaining motionless for days or weeks. While it will eventually emerge from this state, research personnel have noted a tendency for these depressive phases to successively increase in length. The length of the next depressive phase is estimated to be 92 days.
Okay, so I kind of get the vibe like this is SCP-096, but just with motherly instincts. So I mean, all in all, the anomaly is not terribly interesting. We would certainly need to have the impressive portion of this article be in what is left. And it looks as though we just have a few other things here. So this is a incident report. It's also a dialogue log. And as you know, we summon the AI to read this out and perform this for us. So let's have all of them come up on the stage, and let's go. Begin scene. Begin log.
UGV enters SCP-6802's containment cell. Gregory Nitz, age 9, is seated roughly 10 meters away from SCP-6802 and appears to be playing with a rubber ball. His general disposition is noted as suggesting agitation.
So this, I just realized how fucked up this is. So you feed kids to this thing that it is likely to asphyxiate by way of resin down the windpipe. But earlier it was 5 dolls resembling human children between the ages. Yeah, so, okay, wow. It's just really weird that you had provided children in this state. So I think that's the third strike, to be quite honest with you, but let's just see how this shakes out.
SCP-6802.
Play.
UGV closes the distance. SCP-6802 does not appear to notice the presence of the UGV. Gregory becomes more agitated, eventually throwing the ball down in frustration. SCP-6802.
Play.
Gregory.
I want to leave. I want to leave.
UGV reverses slightly to provide space for Gregory and SCP-6802. Gregory takes several steps away from SCP-6802, then turns and runs to the containment cell door. Site Command begins deliberating on the ramifications of terminating the test and retrieving Gregory. SCP-6802.
No play. Sleep.
SCP-6802's voice softens, resembling that of a middle-aged human female. Gregory becomes distraught, banging on the containment cell door repeatedly to the point of inflicting wounds on his hands. Gregory.
Please. I can't see. Please let me.
SCP-6802 closes the distance, leaving a trail of resin in its wake. Upon reaching Gregory, it gently grabs him with its arms and pulls him away from the door. Gregory begins screaming as he is taken toward the center of the cell. SCP-6802.
Sleep.
Incomprehensible.
Sleep. No play. Sleep.
Gregory.
You're not my mother.
SCP-6802. Shh. Gregory.
Leave me alone. Leave me.
SCP-6802 retrieves a pacifier and inserts it into Gregory's mouth before slowly rocking him in an attempt to induce sleep. However, insertion of the pacifier causes a small amount of resin to enter Gregory's airways. The UGV records Gregory choking violently, which SCP-6802 does not appear to notice. This continues until Gregory falls unconscious. UGV is retrieved during the next maintenance sweep.
And scene. Thank you very much. The part of Gregory was played by Russell, and the part of SCP-002 was played by Joey. Joey, I think at some point the instructions on the script were to have your voice change to a middle-aged female to kind of, play the mom part. But you didn't do that, so you did an okay job. Next time, maybe try to modify your voice like that for us.
Fuck you, man.
Okay. Well, you don't have to get that mean. We don't need to assume gender here. All right. So I think that was pretty bad. Certainly, if most people hadn't felt the need to downvote by now, I think we're well into that territory by the end of this. Into this log, which is really quite thin when it comes to the dialogue. I don't think there was a word that had more than 2 syllables in the whole thing. Not that that's like, a serious metric, but just to give you an idea of just how elementary this dialogue is. Now, mostly it is the speech of a 9-year-old, so there's a little bit of excusing wiggle room there. And I'm starting to wonder if these things given, like a ball of rubber, pacifiers, if that's really for this anomaly, because you kind of get a little bit of an, slightly innocent, but once again, very infantile kind of vibe from this thing. So earlier when I said this could go in one of 2 ways, either a mother figure or a sort of a child thing, attempting to be a mother figure. I think it's the second, but it's kind of both. So, but once again, we're basically trying to differentiate between 2 slightly different hues of beige so far, and neither one is really all that appealing. So I'm not even sure what the UGV has to do. Which is the unmanned ground vehicle. I'm not really sure that actually needed to be necessary at all. You could really achieve the same thing with just a stationary camera, and I don't really understand why it is there, and certainly makes this more complicated. This is a short one, and we've only been doing this for just a little bit, so let us go ahead and finish. Brian, you have retained your job. Joey will have to try to compete next time just because of that bad job.
Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, let's finish.
Addendum 2, Memo 6802 Bravo Golf 368. Following the expiration of SCP-6802's most recent subject on, date redacted, SCP-6802 entered a depressive phase from which it has yet to emerge, marked by a notable decrease in activity even relative to other depressive phases. Due to concerns regarding SCP-6802's overall health, a maintenance team was dispatched on, date redacted. Within the cell, a small portion of the western wall had been obscured by sheets of paper. When the sheets were removed, resin depicting a human face was uncovered. Analysis of this drawing revealed it was similar in appearance to that of Amy Dawes, the last subject exposed to SCP-6802, who expired as a consequence of resin-induced asphyxiation.
Surprise.
SCP-6802 no longer reacts to the presence of human children unless they are of a similar age and appearance to Amy Dawes.
Okay.
Personnel have been instructed to not allow such individuals to enter SCP-6802's containment cell. Cooing and low-frequency humming consistent with a human female has been heard in proximity to the containment cell. The source of these vocalizations remains unclear at this time.
So the last line where you sort of have this cooing and low-frequency humming consistent with a human female thing that happens a lot in articles, that can be really, really good, but not when you show the monster, as much as we've seen here. So it really, it doesn't really rise to the level of creepy. It's not even that pathetic or sad because you can't really feel bad for this thing because it basically just kills kids. And I think that's the main problem with this article. Well deserving of its -7 in my opinion. Good job to the wiki voting class on this one. But basically the main problem I have is that the article sort of meanders. It doesn't really have a good idea of what it wants to be. It's almost as though it's really a half-baked anomaly and was sort of thrown into the race and down the hill prior to everything being really attached. And so I think it tried its hardest to fumble itself somewhere. I don't think it did that. And I think one of the worst and most egregious things is that we have to really assume that the Foundation personnel are not only kind of stupid because they keep giving it kids to die, but we also have to assume they're kind of sadistic. So that's not cool. And then I think what the strangest thing to me was that we had this log that featured Gregory Nitz, age 9, and that's the only semblance of characterization we get at all here, which obviously doesn't go very far. I mean, this is a very disturbing log if you really try hard to imagine it and imagine observing it. Obviously, it's very traumatizing. But it's just strange that we pivot so callously from this pseudo character that we've attempted to build up just slightly, if only, and then suddenly we get Amy Dawes dropped. I think at least you could have made these two pseudo characters the same, just to add a little more cohesion to this. So one in the comment section if you liked that, 2 if you didn't. And personally, I think that this is going to get taken care of appropriately by the deletions process. Let's take a quick peek into the discussion. I don't see an author post, so I have to go back and check. Oh, it's right there. Excuse me. King Pogan, whose name I've heard around. I don't think I've read many of these articles by this individual. I think they attempted a 001 that I may have seen. Maybe Pogan is sort of like a cult mentality author where certain people like it, because I've seen people say good things, but that certainly wasn't the best introduction in my opinion. Let's see what Pasta Rasta has to say. Let's see if they can nail the vibe that we kind of got reading from this. Let's check out the critical chops of who is going to comment on here. Okay, so Pasta Rasta says, there's genuinely something very disturbing I can see here underneath the article, and I really like the style of writing, but I'm unsure if this works in the way it is presented right now. I feel like there's a lot of potential, but the article is very formulaic. Yeah, it would be really unexciting and unadventurous in Series 1. And I don't say that to bash Series 1. I think that, the page on the SCP Wiki that lists out those 1,000 slots in the Series 1 is not a reliquary, okay? It's not something that basically contains an old item that can't move around anymore. It's not a reliquary, okay? It's not a container for holy relics. SCP Series 1 style articles are capable to this day, just because the tastes at the SCP have moved on does not mean that it isn't a valid and sound way to conduct containment fiction, and it certainly isn't to say that the creativity and potential value literarily of it is mined completely just because the SCP Wiki likes to tell themselves that's true. So, no offense to Series 1, but just in terms of how bland this was, and maybe if it was released in Series 1, it would have had a chance to be somewhat novel enough to stick around, but absolutely not. Famprin has some questions. Why exactly has the Foundation been continuously killing children by exposing them to a slime monster? The article directly mentions the deaths of 2 children and implies the deaths of more. We are given no reason for the anomaly children, and as it doesn't seem like the anomaly can do anything against being locked in the cell and left there, the Foundation repeatedly exposes civilians to the anomaly. That seems counterintuitive. And then the Foundation, this is a good point that I didn't get into, then the Foundation stops testing because the anomaly has drawn a face on the wall. Why exactly? It doesn't change anything about the anomaly, does it? It's just anomaly SCP, just some awkward phrasing. It has a good emotional core. I think that's a great way to put that. It isn't the strongest emotional article. It feels half-baked. I think that's what I said as well. Yeah. So that's I think Famprin got it pretty spot on. It did have a good emotional core. So all right. So the next comment doesn't like it. It says it's a Series 1. It says this article does nothing. Because if your anomaly is not going to do anything, you at least got to make the prose interesting, and that wasn't done, or the dialogue interesting. I mean, the go-to example is who we looked at last night, Harry Blank. His articles tend to do nothing. But they're very well written, so they have to have a saving grace if they're barely going to be doing anything. So this was nowhere near the level of that technical skill. So I would like to define that statement using this article. The idea of a slime monster that kills children is presented, and how is it used? To kill a child. How does it continue after the monster does what it's made to do? Nothing. It ends. Yeah, that's exactly right. Very, very good. Very, very good. I like that. It's an object that kills children. Why? Yeah. All right, so there was 6802 by King Pogan, I think was the name of the author, if my computer will behave. King Pogan. You can go to this article and click there if you want to check out other works by King Pogan. But we will not do that. We will move on to our second article for yesterday, and this is 6324. Boom. So let's get that up and see what's going on. Okay, so we have 6324. This containment class has Euclid. As always, I ignore the rest of the ACS because not only is it ugly, but it also is useless. So, Brian, why don't you shoot us off here with the containment procedures, please?
Special Containment Procedures, SCP-6324 is to be stored in a standard garage at Site-37 with access to a circular track for testing purposes. Following Incident 6324, the track is to be surrounded by a reinforced wall capable of withstanding an impact from SCP-6324. SCP-6324 has been equipped with a GPS tracker and internal cameras so that it may be located in the event that it is taken from Site-37. Individuals affected by SCP-6324-1 are to be given standard evaluation for mind-affecting anomalies. However, since SCP-6324-1 is a particularly subtle anomaly, no amnesticization is required.
Interesting. So we have a vehicle of some sort that is probably anomalously kinetic, and at least is involved in a few, probably high-velocity impacts. It's interesting that this is going to somehow introduce a mind-affecting anomaly. That's interesting. So, all right. Well, short and sweet. I think that was just fine. So let's keep going and see what this anomaly is about.
Description: SCP-6324 is a 1987 brand station wagon.
Good year.
It has continued functioning since its creation seemingly without repair, despite natural erosion.
Not the brand.
Any individual parts of SCP-6324 may break or wear down, but none of these ultimately impair its ability to function. Whenever two individuals are within SCP-6324 and it is driven for over 30 minutes, an instance of SCP-6324-1 begins. During an SCP-6324-1 instance, SCP-6324 displays driving capabilities far beyond the usual of any other similar model of vehicle. These abilities include increased acceleration and braking power, the ability to make impossibly sharp turns, and increased durability to the point of near indestructibility.
Okay. So it's interesting that it happens if you drive it for over 30 minutes. I would say that it's trying to incentivize short trips. Maybe this is some sort of like green energy vehicle that a convert to green energy, and is trying to force its drivers to behave. But then again, 30 minutes is a metric of time and not necessarily of distance. So whatever. Interesting. And it seems as though it's sort of like the Mary Sue car. So I think that if this article is going to be good, which the voting class is telling us that it is at plus 14, then it's going to have to do some acrobatics. Maybe the car will do some flips. Speaking metaphorically, you know what I'm talking about.
Individuals inside of SCP-6324 during an SCP-6324-1 instance will tend to show certain changes to their personalities, including, but not limited to, poor impulse control, a strong desire to seek out new experiences, and an increase to any existing behavioral differences between them. Most of these effects end once the SCP-6324-1 event completes. The one exception being an increased bond between the affected individuals. This connection occurs despite any existing animosity they may have had. The two will begin to address each other as if they are close friends. Even when informed of SCP-6324's nature, they will be unable to identify the relationship as anomalous, instead attributing it to having a significant shared experience during SCP-6324-1.
So we just came across this with the Harry Blank article yesterday, where the anomaly is apparently so subtle that it's really, really hard to even peg down as an anomaly. And the same is the case here. What actual evidence, what actual reasoning do they have to conclude that this is an anomalous effect and not exactly what the people apparently are misinformed believing it as, instead attributing it to having a significant shared experience? But I do think this is a little more interesting. We've gotten a little more character to the setup here. There's a very interesting poetic relationship between a person and a vehicle, something that can take them a very long distance. And so I liked this part where a strong desire to seek out new experiences. I thought that was pretty interesting. But I think there's a grammatical problem in the second sentence here of this last paragraph of the description, where there's a period and then it says including but not limited to. That shouldn't be a period. That should just continue perhaps with a comma or a semicolon or a em dash. So, on the whole, I think that's a fair anomaly and special containment procedures. It's a pretty interesting wind-up to watch happen, so we'll get into the rest of it. Looks like we've got incident logs, 6 of them, and then a final addendum to get to. So let's read what the incident logs must be about.
Incident 6324, on the 25th of June 2019, a test of SCP-6324 was conducted using D-927,491 and D-391,848.
That's a lot of D
Due
class.
to a containment breach, the test was abandoned and most personnel were called away. However, after D-391,848 was taken inside, D-927,491 used this as an opportunity to escape, kidnapping researcher Franklin White as a hostage and stealing the equipment from a nearby guard. The following are audio and video logs from the cameras inside SCP-6324.
Okay. Let me ask a question, and let's see what it says. Okay, so once again, I think we can already attribute a little bit of stank going on here, and the reason is, if you look back up here, because at this point you have to wonder, the cameras seem so conveniently placed, and if you look back up, it's really sort of just jerry-rigged into there. In the last sentence of this first paragraph, the containment procedures, the SCP has been equipped with a GPS tracker and internal cameras so that it may be located in the event that it is taken from Site 37, which obviously is a little foreshadowing. I'm not sure why internal cameras would be necessary to do that when a GPS could do that too. So it just kind of seems like a little bit of a crude compositional motion with not a lot of finesse. It's a very ungraceful move to just suddenly have these cameras in here just because you want them in there, and otherwise you wouldn't be able to get these incident logs. But I also want to harken back to this last paragraph of the description too, because it does something a little similar. You basically have anomalized the goal and the job of the author in this case. So you've anomalized it to where basically the two people who we are already seeing are going to become good friends is guaranteed by way of anomaly and not necessarily by way of writing and of good writing and good characterization, good dialogue, and good interactions. So let's hope that the author doesn't use the fact that the anomaly has thus far dictated that the characters will become lovable to one another and presumably to us as well in the process. And let's hope that they don't lean on that as a crutch too much. All right, so once again, we have 6 of these incident logs. We will get into these one by one. And as we can see, we've got really a few characters. These are the 2 that were previously mentioned. And so we will call our crew back up on stage. The role of D9 is going to be played by Amy, and the part of Researcher White is going to be played by Matthew.
Researcher White.
I spy with my little eye something that starts with the letter R.
So I'm already a little annoyed and slightly even pissed off. It's almost as though I'm asked to believe that this Researcher White is an absolute idiot with the with the attention concerns of a 5-year-old. So the first glimpse we get into the car and the first coming out swinging attempts of characterization is that they're playing I Spy with My Little Eye on the road. So I don't think this is off to a very good start. That's a pretty stinky way to introduce all this, but let's see if it gets any better.
Researcher White.
I spy with my little eye something that starts with the letter R.
D927491.
Road.
Researcher White.
Yep. How do you know?
D927491.
It was either that or road sign. There's not a single other thing to see.
Researcher White.
Oh, I'll find something. I spy with my little eye something that starts with the letter
Begins squinting.
S.
D927491.
Are you looking at the? You're going to go blind,
Researcher White.
I'll be fine.
D927491.
Don't say I didn't warn you.
Researcher White.
Can you just guess it already?
D927491.
I don't know.
Researcher White.
Please.
D927491.
Fine, you're looking at the sun.
Researcher White winces and turns away.
Thank you.
Should be a J.
D927491.
You're an idiot, you know that, right?
It should be a J.
Researcher White.
Moving on. I spy, with my little eye, something that starts with the letter
Turns.
D.
D927491.
D? What, like dirt?
Researcher White.
No, Nothing like dirt.
D927491.
What else is there? Whatever, I don't really care. Stop looking at me like that. It's annoying. Pause. Wait.
Researcher White.
Yes?
D927491.
It's not. Size. It's me, isn't it?
Researcher White.
Ding ding ding.
D927491.
Dick.
Researcher White.
What? Why?
D927491.
You think I like being called this? It's a stupid letter and number. I didn't get a choice in any of this.
Researcher White.
Did you have a choice in your other name?
D927491.
Not the point, and you know it.
Researcher White.
Fine, what should I call you?
D927491.
My name's Abigail.
Researcher White.
Okay. Abigail. I'll remember that.
And scene. Okay, pretty good delivery, everyone. We're missing a few instances of punctuation here in this log. So we're starting to see a little bit how the anomaly is playing out. We do the classic break through the mold and mesh of the D-class impersonal designation via numbers, and we enter into someone's actual, homegrown, heartfelt name. And so we're starting to see them bond. I think this would have worked a lot better if we had started out with a little bit of, a little bit of conflict between the two of them, some animosity even, and then work our way to kind of making a breakthrough emotionally. Instead of that, we start out with, really once again, a very juvenile, very idiotic vibe in the car, almost as if they're close friends as it is. And it's just a very strange thing to be asked to believe, because, once again, this is an individual who was just kidnapped, taken hostage, essentially, by this D-class. And instead, it looks as though he was hoping for that to be done, and maybe at the same time hoping that the D-class had packed him a little bag of snacky snacks while they were on the road, and hopefully that D-class didn't forget Researcher White's glass of warm milk. So, okay, but the first log is setting out to do something, and I think it did it okay. I think we see where it's trying to do it, at least. And so, it kind of flailed, but I think it did it. So, good for that. The next one is once again the same duo, and I don't see why we should change things up. Let's just let's have the same actors. So y'all take it away whenever you're ready. Begin log.
Researcher White.
So where are we going anyway?
D927491. Away. Researcher White.
Just away? Do you seriously have no better plan? You realize that we'll have to stop eventually, right?
D927491.
I've got a plan. I know a guy. Good at smuggling and owes me a favor. If anyone can keep us away from the Foundation, it's him.
Researcher White.
Clever. So what's the guy's name? Tutos Tommy? Jimmy the Weasel? Maybe it's something short, like Spike. I like Spike.
D927491.
His name's Edward. You watched too many movies.
Researcher White.
Well, excuse me for not knowing about the criminal underworld. I guess I'm not cultured enough for this.
D927491.
Are you mocking me?
Researcher White.
Maybe.
D927491.
Glass houses.
Researcher White.
What's that supposed to mean? I'm a perfectly respectable person, oh my god. The world's weirdest ball of twine is coming up.
D927491.
You're screwing with me.
Researcher White.
No, look at that sign.
D927491.
That says, gas station, 3 miles.
Researcher White.
Right, forgot about the anti-memetic. We couldn't take down that sign, so we had to get a little creative.
D927491.
So is there a gas station ahead or not?
Researcher White.
Don't remember. We have to go, please. Please.
D927491.
Have you forgotten that we're on the run?
Researcher White.
Oh, it won't be long. And you haven't lived until you've seen that twine. It's both there and not there, sort of prismatic, and always twitching. Just an all-around drug trip.
Okay, so, once again, I was kind of kidding about the snacky snacks and the hot milk, but it seems as though Researcher White has very firmly reverted back into the actions and behavior and basically the role of a kid. He seems to be having a fantastic time that he's been captured as a hostage. I do like this little part about the anti-memetic. I think that's pretty clever. And there's some decent play between these two characters. I think the characterization is completely disoriented. It's totally out of whack. But if you just get over that, which is why I think this should be a J, because it's pretty funny at times. There's some decent volleying here with the dialogue. So I guess they're going to go take an exit to see a ball of twine. All right, let's keep going.
D927491.
Like you know what a drug trip feels like.
Researcher White.
You don't know everything about me. It's that exit up there.
D927491.
There's no exit.
Researcher White.
Right. Anti-memetics. Just let me take the wheel for a second.
D927491.
What are you doing?
Researcher White forcefully grabs the steering wheel and turns it sharp to the right. D927491.
Are you trying to kill us?
Researcher White.
Stop fighting. You'll make us crash.
SCP-6324 drives through what appears to be a solid barrier, and continues onto the concealed road leading to SCP, the world's weirdest ball of twine.
I hate to say it, but actually, I think I would rather be reading the SCP about the world's weirdest ball of twine. That actually sounds kind of nice. That got into a little bit of a rut. Basically, the anti-memetics thing came back around almost verbatim, and this should be a question mark instead of an exclamation point. But just little stuff, no big deal. Let's keep going.
D927491.
I swear this road wasn't here before.
Researcher White.
I don't have time to explain all the anomalous science. Just enjoy it. You're one of the only people who's going to experience the best roadside attraction on Earth.
D927491.
You sound like a tour guide right now.
Researcher White.
Well, I did work at the research outpost here a while ago. So I know the ins and outs.
SCP-6324 stops. D927491.
Research outpost?
Researcher White.
Yeah, we were researching wherever the ball came from. I think it's a portal to another dimension.
D927491.
I'm not walking into a Foundation lair.
Researcher White.
Relax, those guys are a bunch of lazy deadbeats. When I worked there, half the time was throwing things into the portal to see what would happen. The other half was making up lab reports. Did you know that you can just redact half a paper? No one notices.
Okay, so we're kind of getting into LOL Foundation territory here. We don't have a self-insert, so that's nice. But we're getting to be just insultingly comic here, honestly. There's a couple footnotes here, so let's check that out. The other half was making up lab reports, and this footnote says, soon after Researcher White left the research outpost, a series of disciplinary investigations were carried out, eventually resulting in the firing and replacement of many active researchers. And it's a shame someone like Researcher White wasn't included in the firing of that, given how he's reacting to this situation, which is to say, completely unprofessionally. The next sentence, did you know that you can just redact half of a paper? The footnote says, this is not to be taken as actual advice. And then the final one says, no one notices. And the footnote says they notice. So we have officially crossed over into the world of either Neo-Law Foundation, where you really clearly have thrown the challenge of keeping this somewhat fidelitous to an in-universe perspective completely out the window. The author has really been a little heavy-handed on the attempted humor that's pushing through here. And it's pushing so hard, it's really ripping up basically what should be done here. There's a way to be kind of funny, and playful, and it's sort of still be okay, in the terms of it not really kind of just being sort of a masturbation session. You're basically just jacking off in the reader's face at this point. So I think by this point the article is done from me. I mean, we'll keep reading it, don't get me wrong, but I don't think you could possibly go anywhere with this. All right, let's finish this up. We were here.
D927,491.
Interesting. And how do I know you aren't leading me into a trap?
Researcher White.
You don't. But do you really want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime experience?
D927,491 size and SCP-6324 starts moving again. D927,491.
Now you really sound like a tour guide.
Researcher White.
Perfect.
In a tour guide voice.
Coming up on the right, you should see the world's weirdest ball of twine. And can I say, it's already a sight to behold. Only the finest unpainted brick walls.
D927,491.
Doesn't look much like an attraction.
Researcher White.
Yeah, the Foundation tends to do that to places. Trust me, it's way cooler on the inside.
D927,491.
It better be, because I'm taking a pretty big risk here.
Researcher White.
It'll be safe, I promise.
So, some questionable characterization. Again, I hate to be so nitpicky here, but once again, this is someone who has escaped basically a life of servitude and potentially certain death, and taken a Foundation agent hostage. And for all this D-class individual knows, Researcher White is trying to lure this individual back to just be captured again and to free himself. And maybe that's really his strategy the whole time, is seem like a stupid kid and catch this D-class off guard in a gotcha. But somehow some part of me doesn't think that's really what's going on here. Just a lot of questions, a pretty amazing amount of zaniness that we're asked to stomach here. And it's not even that funny, honestly. I maybe understand why this wasn't made into a J. It's sort of somewhere between the two. All right, so this is I think it's the third. Still with our two actor and actress. So let's hit it up. See what the ball of twine is going to do.
D927,491 and Researcher White are running from the research outpost around SCP, the world's weirdest ball of twine, chased by armed Foundation agents. D927,491.
I thought it was going to be safe.
Researcher White.
I don't know. I don't recognize any of those guys.
D927,491 struggles to open SCP-6324's door for a few seconds. Researcher White.
Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up.
D927,491.
I'm trying.
The door comes open and the two go inside. Gunshots are heard behind them. Researcher White.
Wow, were they even aiming?
D927,491.
Don't know, don't care.
Researcher White.
I mean, they're usually such good shots.
More gunshots. Researcher White turns around. Researcher White.
They weren't aiming at us.
D-927,491.
What are you talking about?
A large, iridescent moth is seen following SCP-6324 in close pursuit. D-927,491 sees it in the rear mirror. D-927,491.
What is that thing?
Researcher White.
A large, secto identity. Judging from the context, it's likely extra-dimensional. Judging from its actions, it's likely hostile.
D-927,491.
Turn off researcher brain for 1 second.
Researcher White.
Rainbow Mothra.
D-927,491.
Great. Just great. Why is it coming after us?
Researcher White.
I'm pretty sure it came from the twine. Maybe the ball wasn't an attraction at all. Some kind of egg?
Big egg?
D-927,491.
But why us? The researchers were the ones poking it with sticks.
Researcher White.
Maybe we have something it wants.
D-927,491.
We were in the building for 3 seconds. I didn't take anything, did you?
Researcher White.
Well,
D-927,491.
You better not.
Researcher White.
I didn't want this whole thing to be a waste.
Okay, take a little pause here just to kind of chew on this incident log so far. I think that one of the ways you can identify Neo-Law Foundation dialogue, just subjectively, just going on feel, is that it sort of feels like there should be a laugh track behind it, and you get the sort of sitcom the sitcom's sort of flow. So the lines like this, where it's like, "Did you take anything? Well, and the eyes roll and the shrug comes up." I mean, this whole thing is like sitcom shrug. That's really who Researcher White is. The same thing seen in lines like, "Honey, did you do this?" And then the husband goes, "I love you." It's kind of stuff that people like comedians like Tim Heidecker really make fun of very well. So that's really what we see here a lot. And it's really honestly getting very tiring to read this. It'd be different if this was like, if this had some interesting thoughts in it, I suppose. But it's basically I'm sorry, it's just very bad. Let's keep going.
D-927,491.
How did you even manage that?
Researcher White.
You know the phrase exit through the gift shop?
The entity lands on SCP-6324, denting the roof. D-927,491.
Whatever you took, you better give it back.
Researcher White.
We don't even really know what it's after.
D-927,491.
What did you take?
Researcher White pulls a small crystalline ball out of his pocket. It appears to shimmer with many different colors. D-927,491.
Sure seems magic. Give it back.
Researcher White.
But it looks so cool.
The entity starts to crack one of SCP-6324's windows. D-927,491.
That thing's leaving the car. You can choose whether or not you're going with it.
Researcher White.
Fine.
Researcher White throws the object out of SCP-6324. It proceeds to shatter on the road.
Nice.
D-927,491.
No.
All right, so never has an AI, text-to-speech AI, so appropriately delivered an emotion in a line as this one right here. No. Wow.
D-927,491.
No.
Researcher White.
Well, it was nice knowing you.
D-927,491.
Can't say the same.
The entity screeches and lands next to the shards, picks them up, and flies away. D-927,491.
Huh?
Researcher White.
Maybe it's more interested in the material than the structure.
D-927,491.
Or maybe it's planning revenge.
Researcher White.
Either way, let's go before it comes back.
Okay, so we got 3 more of these. I'm really kind of tired. You know, I'm really kind of a slave to the content of the articles that we cover. I think, you know, once again, I think the show is much better when we actually have good articles. And really, you know, I think in the few days I've been doing this, we've had 1, maybe 2 really good articles out of maybe 6 or 7. So I don't think this is going to be getting us exactly where we need to go. I don't think it's going to do it for us. But maybe you like this, so that's cool. Different strokes for different folks. I'm just still getting a very strong, untalented sitcom level writing of the dialogue here. Let's go to this next one.
Researcher White.
The gas is getting pretty low.
D-927,491.
You don't say.
Researcher White.
Hey, I was just trying to help.
D-927,491.
Fine. There's a gas station up ahead.
Researcher White.
So the sign wasn't lying.
SCP-6324 pulls into the gas station. Researcher White.
Wait, how are you planning on paying for the gas? You don't have a wallet.
D-927,491 exits SCP-6324. Researcher White is preoccupied and doesn't notice. Researcher White.
You could have gotten me to pay for you, but I left my wallet in the break room, and I don't think we're getting it back anytime soon. Maybe you could go ask for money, but that probably won't work. People around here look pretty stingy. I wonder if there's some change in the cushions.
Gunshots. Pause. D-927,491 returns to SCP-6324 and starts pumping gasoline. Researcher White.
Did you just?
D-927,491.
Relax, they were warning shots.
Researcher White.
That doesn't matter. You can't just rob a gas station.
D-927,491.
I needed money, so I got
Oof,
some.
what a rebel.
Researcher White.
You just can't. You shouldn't. Now the police are probably after us.
D-927,491.
Hey, they take around 10 minutes to show up. And guess what? Now we have gas.
Researcher White.
I don't even know why I'd get in this car with you.
D-927,491.
The gun.
Researcher White.
Oh right.
D-927,491.
Look on the bright side.
Researcher White.
And that is?
D-927,491.
I'm out of bullets.
Okay. So we got a pretty blatant typo here. I don't even know why I got in this car with you. Brian, could you do us a favor and maybe pronounce that? Maybe we just don't know what this word is.
Tkut.
Dikut. I'm sorry, I pronounced that incorrectly. So let's take a moment and look up Dikut. Perhaps once again, perhaps it's just a word that we don't know. So Dikut. What does Dikut mean? Dikut means don't go over there. Okay, so it does mean something. I don't even know why I don't go over there in this car with you. I guess it actually makes sense. It actually grammatically makes sense. Kinda. Wow. All right. Well. Okay. So she's got a gun. So if she has a gun, why didn't they shoot that moth that was coming after them? I mean, it seems like a bad way to use your final bullets. Maybe she just didn't realize that she was about to run out, and yeah, I'm not so sure shooting people. The tank of gas probably isn't worth it. I don't think people are chasing you still. Boy, getting real Marvel vibes from this. Not just the dialogue, but like sort of the direction. The direction of this, where it's like, okay, hey, let's go see this ball of yarn. Do. And then the next scene, the doors are open and they're running. They're like, "Whoa! I thought you said it was safe." You know. I don't know. I see Chris Pratt as Researcher White, and it's not his best performance. Okay, let's go to this next one. I think we're on 5. This is second to last. Thanks for sticking in here with me. My God, kudos to you. All right, begin log.
D927491.
No.
Researcher White.
Please.
D927491.
No.
Researcher White.
I swear I'll never ask for anything ever again.
D927491.
That's a lie and you know it.
Researcher White.
Okay, but I really want them.
D927491.
We are not stopping for snacks.
Researcher White. Looking at fair stands by the side of the road.
But it smells so good.
D927491.
No.
Researcher White.
Abby. Listen to me. They have churros.
D927491.
Don't call me Abby.
Researcher White.
Okay, Abigail. They still have churros.
D927491.
Still don't have money.
Researcher White.
That didn't stop you earlier.
D927491.
What?
Researcher White.
Just saying.
D927491.
Are you telling me to rob someone? With an empty gun? In the middle of a street fair? For a churro?
Researcher White.
If you wouldn't mind.
D927491.
Sigh.
D927491 stops SCP-6324 and exits, coming back 2 minutes later with 2 churros. D927491.
Stop sticking your head out the window. It's attracting attention.
Researcher White.
Thank you.
D927491. Eating one of the churros.
And I'm never doing this again.
Researcher White.
Sure.
A police siren is heard from behind SCP-6324.
You got to question these people's intelligence and their judgment. I mean, so they've outrun, the Foundation agents once. They've fired warning shots at someone in order to get gas. And so once again, I guess this person held up somebody at gunpoint for churros. It just seems as though, when I first started writing for the SCP Wiki, that was back in the day when back in my day, when people would kind of shit on you if you wrote the Foundation to be hilariously incompetent. Because the challenge, you can write anybody stupid, right? That's easy. It's easy to write stupid characters. It's not easy to write intelligent characters. It's hard. So, this is in my opinion, pretty dumb dialogue. Both of these individuals have questionable actions and levels of intelligence, I would say. And once again, just basically the sitcom vibe of this, I'm expecting someone at any time in any of these dialogues to go, "Honey, I'm home." So maybe that'll show up in here. Let's see.
A police siren is heard from behind SCP-6324. D927491.
Shit.
Researcher White.
Did someone see you?
D927491.
Apparently.
D927491 starts to pull over SCP-6324. Researcher White, looking in the mirror.
Wait, that's not police.
D927491.
Sure sounds like them.
Researcher White.
No, I recognize those guys. Those are 2 of our plants. Don't stow.
D927491 slams on the accelerator. Pedestrians start jumping out of the way. Researcher White.
Yeah, do that.
D900.
I'm envious of the pedestrians. I wish that I could jump out of the way as well. Sorry to interrupt you guys.
Researcher White.
Yeah, do that.
D927491.
Still behind us?
Researcher White.
Yeah, they're matching our speed.
D927491.
Then we have to lose them another way.
SCP-6324 takes a sharp right turn into an alleyway, only barely fitting through.
So wait, SCP-6324 takes a sharp right turn, or the driver of the car does? This is a serious question, because at some point we're going to see that this car has anomalous properties. We haven't seen that yet. In fact, technically we haven't seen any anomalous property, unless you want to pretend like two people spending time together and forming somewhat more substantial of a bond is somehow anomalous. But maybe that's the first time we've seen this actual anomaly pop up, but probably not.
Researcher White.
Good news, I think we lost them. Bad news, this is a dead end.
D927491.
And here I thought you were the smart one.
She just called him dumb earlier. This is the guy who was looking into the sun. If something changed in the characterization and the narrative and the unfolding of these people's adventures together, whereby this one person has become smarter, I missed that. Maybe someone else caught that. I did not. He got his churros, though.
SCP-6324 accelerates, driving onto a pile of trash bags in front of a dumpster. D927491 shifts gears, and uses as a ramp for SCP-6324 to drive vertically up the back wall of the alley.
Okay, so that actually was not a grammatically correct sentence. The syntax is all fucked in there. And uses what as a ramp for SCP-6324 to drive vertically up? Obviously, it's the trash bags, but you wouldn't know it from the way the author here, actually wrote the sentence. Yikes. But yeah, we're starting to see the zaniness translate into the car, and we are starting to kind of dip into the anomalous here with the car driving vertically up the back wall of the alley. And just looking ahead at the dialogue, it seems as though the people are not surprised. Researcher White and Abigail, they don't seem to mind that the car just drove vertically up a wall. All right.
Researcher White.
How did you know that would work?
D927491.
I was the #1 test subject for this thing. I know a few tricks. For instance, gear shifts basically magic.
D927491 shifts gears back, and SCP-6324 goes around the corner of the roof and begins to drive on the top. D927491.
And we are approaching the edge of the roof.
Researcher White.
Well, shift gears again.
D927491.
This is a station wagon. Do you think it can fly?
Researcher White.
I didn't think it could ride up walls.
D927000.
All right, so that was just undone. So I had to eat crow, because this is actually a very good observation that the D-Class actually has tested this thing quite a lot. So I thought to myself, okay, so that's why neither of them really reacted very strongly to the car suddenly going up a vertical wall. Because Researcher White is a researcher, and certainly he's been on this case. Certainly he was around the D-Class and this anomaly. Otherwise, he may not have been taken as a hostage here. But no, the author has decided to make that an impossibility by this line, saying that Researcher White actually didn't know that the car could go up walls. So, I mean, the guy is remarkably collected and calm for someone who's never seen this happen before, much less be in the car when it suddenly and spontaneously happens. Certainly the moment suggesting a different way that would go to him, given that this is the first time he's seen it. Gosh, this is painful. This is painful, but this is what I signed up for, so... All right, so basically...
D927...
Let's see. So they shift gears. They fall off the edge of the roof. And here we go.
D927,491.
And now we're dying in second gear.
Researcher White.
No. I can't die here. I haven't done anything with my life.
Surprise.
I'm just a second-rate, slacker researcher.
Yep.
And this is how I die.
Fits.
Plummeting from a building on some stupid car chase.
Remarkably
I guess I
composed.
can take comfort in the fact that no one will miss me.
I will not.
D927,491.
Hey, you're wrong about that.
Researcher White.
Really?
D927,491.
Yeah, you can totally die here.
Researcher White.
Now's not the time for semantics.
SCP-6324 abruptly stops falling. Researcher White.
What's going on?
Researcher White and D927,491 both look out the windows to see a giant prismatic moth carrying SCP-6324. Researcher White.
I guess I forgot rule number 1 of the Foundation. Expect the unexpected.
D927,491.
Herb.
My friends taught me a different rule.
See you next week.
Researcher White.
What is it?
D927,491.
Never trust magic bullshit.
The entity's head splits open, revealing a large mouth. Acidic spittle drips onto SCP-6324. D927,491.
And my rule has never been wrong.
Researcher White.
I don't get it. Why is it trying to eat us?
D927,491.
Let's go.
You
My
broke
God.
its marble. It's probably mad.
Researcher White.
Oh, do you think sorry will cut it?
D927,491.
Might as well try.
Researcher White. Out window.
Sorry.
The entity does not seem to notice. Researcher White.
Well, that didn't work.
D927,491.
You think? It's okay, I've got a solution.
Pulls out gun. Researcher White.
I thought that was out of bullets.
D927,491.
It is.
Throws the gun at the entity. The gun does not appear to injure the creature, but it does make it wince and
God.
drop SCP-6324 onto the road. Researcher White.
God, what
Now
if I fall
drive.
asleep in this stream before the article is over with?
D927,491 slams
Scary.
the accelerator,
Scary
swerving
thought.
to avoid cars.
I got some cookies that
Ahead
I'm
is a
going to eat.
barricade constructed by a combination of
After
the
this.
Foundation and local law enforcement.
Really looking at forward to
Researcher
that.
White.
Oh no, they're ready for us.
Oh, no.
D927,491.
Buckle up.
D927,491 shifts gears. Upon hitting the barricade, SCP-6324's front wheels tilt upwards and the whole vehicle leaves the ground. The officers stare at it in disbelief as it goes over their heads before landing on the ground.
Whoa.
Researcher White.
I guess this thing can fly.
I mean, it's kind of like, the officers are the same kind of officers that would try to rob that house in Home Alone, or you might see them right at home in the E.T. movie where they just they're dumbfounded at the bike floating in the air. So in scene, and there's a footnote here that says the agents were unable to pursue SCP-6324 any further due to the greater danger present. Eventually, the entity was contained, and cover story Kappa 931, Lost Parade Balloon, was given. We have one more incident log, and this one is still a sizable chunk. I think this line says it all. Just going to point this out while I see it. The D-Class asks Researcher White, "What are you, 5?" And I think that basically is all you need to know about the characterization of this particular character, but also the article on the whole. Let's just get through this since we're almost done. We made pretty good time tonight. We do have a third actor for this scene, so maybe this third character will introduce some much needed defibrillation into this, and this role will be played, it's POI, long number, and it's going to be played by Gerant. Let's hit it. Begin log.
Researcher White.
Are we there yet?
D927491.
What are you? 5?
Are we cool
Researcher
yet?
White.
Nope. Just bored.
D927491.
Well, fine. We're almost there.
Researcher White.
Awesome. I can finally meet Spike.
D927491. Starts all SCP-6324 into a driveway.
Do not call him that.
Researcher White.
You have no power over me.
D927491 size and exits SCP-6324. A doorbell is heard. Pause. POI 740176 approaches SCP-6324.
Gerard.
POI 740176.
So you're the runaways?
Researcher White.
We sure are, Spike.
D927491.
His name is still Edward.
POI 740176.
Still?
Oh please, it's Spike to my friends.
Researcher White's eyes go wide as he gasps. D927491.
Don't lie to the guy, it's too easy.
POI 740176.
Well, names aside, what happened to you, Abigail? I heard you got the chair. And what's with this uniform you're wearing?
Researcher White.
She could tell you, but she'd have to kill you.
POI 740176.
You're joking, right?
Researcher White.
Yeah, we're not the ones who'd kill you.
POI 740176.
Well, what's another person after my life?
D927491.
You're a truck driver with a secret compartment. You're not Han Solo.
POI 740176.
Well, maybe I want to be. I like a little action.
D927491.
Okay.
There's no talking you out of this.
Sorry, gang. I'm gonna call it. This is absolutely bad. If you like this, obviously you can go read the rest of it yourself. It's almost done. I think the Spike thing killed it ultimately for me. That was the last straw. Just no. Sorry. There's a few moments in here that are actually pretty funny. That actually I thought were pretty funny when she pulled the gun out and there's no bullets and it is out of bullets and threw it. And then the staring into the sun bit was actually pretty funny just to imagine. If you ignore the greater context of just how dumb these people have to be, if you get over that, you can probably chuckle at a few things. I think it would have been better if timestamps were kept during this whole thing, like time away from pursuit, time away from a containment breach. That way we can kind of keep in the back of our mind a little interesting little road sign for the greater anomaly, which once again the anomalous components show up after 30 minutes of driving. So that would have been interesting. I think it also would have added a little bit extra momentum, a little extra interest to the article because when you have that reminder of the time, it's sort of a pressure on the article, just to contrast the zaniness going on here. The dialogue is by far the worst part, and it's a shame because that's definitely dominates the article. I think it takes a lot of inspiration from Marvel, the sort of lethal action fun chatter that Marvel characters sort of do and are known for, but only does that do poor things for this article in the context of the Foundation, which once again is supposed to be at least somewhat professional, and there is absolutely none of that in this article. There's also numerous points in here. I don't know if you noticed as we were reading, but there's numerous points where punctuation is actually not even there at all, completely lacking, mostly in the italicized text of the logs, and that wasn't a stylistic thing because the punctuation does show up about half the time or a little more. So the slight chuckles of humor are certainly not enough to keep this thing afloat. I think maybe they would play better in a J, but they're not funny enough to actually work there any better than I think they do here. And of course, just what I mentioned, basically this article is plagued with just absolutely idiotic characters, absolutely idiotic formulations of the Foundation, incredibly way too heavy-handed attempts at that sort of idiotic humor, culminating in spike. So I think if I had to say one thing about this article, it would basically just be that it's comprehensively shrug. And I mean that in more ways than one. Shrug, obviously, because the quality of it and the read was, I couldn't get through it. It was too bad to actually finish. But shrug also because that's kind of like what a sitcom is. You know, if you see an advertisement for a sitcom, what is the main character probably doing? He's probably, you know, one of those goofy comedy kind of things. He's basically shrugging. So that's a shout out to the fact that this article and particularly its dialogue would like to be a sitcom when it grows up. So I think that it's pretty safe to categorize this as Neo-Law Foundation. Okay, and I've mentioned that a couple times. We looked at that last time, I think. But just in case you're not sure of what that is, I've mentioned that a few times. Neo-Law Foundation is kind of the mumble rap of containment fiction. You know, writing that's not really lyrically minded. It's more just kind of like drool out of your lip kind of stuff. It has the equivalent of like auto-tune, saturation, unimaginative backing tracks, flashy imagery, flashes in the pan of the, for example, these bad jokes in place of actual concepts. Dumb as dirt dialogue. That's exactly what we see here. That's pretty common to Neo-Law Foundation. And once again, it's something that is satisfied to be at the compositional level of a middle schooler, which in years of old at the SCP, people tried to overshoot their age when it came to their compositions, and that has completely inverted. We see a number of authors who try to write down to the lowest common denominator of the voting class. And unfortunately, as we can see, it has paid off for this author. And that's really a larger criticism and commentary about really the degenerate part of this SCP Wiki that has basically become a mimetic competition wherein the more you can cartoonize something, the better. You know, this article and certainly other Neo-Law Foundation ones, they could easily be introduced, concluded, and even improved by yakety sax being played the whole time. So, that's basically what Neo-Law Foundation is. It really almost can't help and almost can't do anything other than turn the wiki and the entire genre into just a conga line of corny one-liner jokes that a comedian who's booed off stage, you know, might also boo while he's at it. So let's go down to the comments here. There's only two. And we'll see who the author is. Fire Knight, might as well do an author post. I do not know of this author. I think this is a very, very poor introduction for this author to me, in my opinion. Not that this person cares. I had fun writing this, and that's great, honestly. Obviously, I'm pretty hard on this just because it's not my style, but you know, it's clearly other people's style. And you know, if you had fun writing this, I'm sure it was fun writing. The dialogue certainly, you know, it was very jokey, very jovial the whole time. So I can see how this would have been fun writing. So that there's a silver lining to this. It just isn't on the reading end of it. It's not the right kind of bizarre. It's just maybe it's the right kind of bizarre, but just done very, very poorly. It's Ruskied says, I find this kind of fun. It's kind of like a slice of life article. That's fun. In other words, a sitcom. Most of these slice of life articles just are related to Site 43, which once again, I'm glad this person said that, just proved my point. Site 43 is Neo-Law Foundation to the core. That's really probably the greatest nidus of bacterial housing and spread of Neo-Law Foundation on the site. Currently is Site 43. Once again, primarily Harry Blank, you know, and those other authors that are associated with that clique and that hub. But it's a breath of fresh air to see a slice of life article that is unrelated to that site, which I think is actually the exact opposite. If you're gonna do something like Neo-Law Foundation, I would hope that it would at least be contained to you know, some kind of containment procedures and protocols instead of spilling out into the wiki. But it's too late. We've already seen it populate itself quite dramatically in the wiki. And so this is a very good example of when I say that When it comes to terrible articles, the SCP voting class, the wiki, tends to have about a 90% success rate. So that's to say 9 out of every 10 articles that are deleted deserved it very, very thoroughly, while 1 of those 10 probably is way better than the average and certainly could have stayed on the site. And on the other side of the coin, in the positive direction of adjudication for articles on the SCP Wiki, their percentile is much, much lower. I'd say it's about 60%. So what that means essentially is that 6 out of every 10 articles are kept on the site when they deserve to be, whereas about 4 out of those 10 are kept on the site when they do not deserve to be. They're not good instances of containment fiction. They're next to talentless, very, very poor efforts, and this is, I think, a perfect example of that. Now, it doesn't have a stellar rating, but at one day at 14, it's probably pretty safe, so I imagine this is going to stay on the site, and I think in my mind it'll forever be just a statistic, one of those articles that basically very clearly demonstrates that the rating module does not have the capacity to convey any sort of value judgment on actual writing talent and quality of someone's literary skills. Okay, well, so that was fun. That's really it for tonight, just 2. We're at about our usual time. Thank you so much for joining, and we will do this again tomorrow night as we do every night, weeknights. Not sure what I'm going to do on the weekends, but I know I ain't going to be doing this. So I got to go do something to make me forget about this article. So y'all check it out, SCP Meta on Twitch. Once again, we do this every night. We have our main show on Saturdays at 11 Central for about an hour. That's a call-in show. You can share your thoughts. Yeah, thanks for joining. And I always have a good time, even when the articles are like this. So hope to see you next time tomorrow night, and have a great night. Thanks.